It's time for the Everyman, where real man talk.
Let's go. Time to grind, get inside your mind. Yeah, we working overtime. That's the only way to climb. We gon' make it in our prime. Signing on the dotted line, cashing checks left and right. That's the way I'm living life.
Hello and welcome to the Everyman podcast. Today we have a very special guest. We have Christian Thrane, who is the Marketing Managing Director for Consumer in EE. How are you today, Christian?
I'm very good, Luis. Thank you.
No, well, we are very grateful for having you today. It's been something that's probably been in the pipeline for what I'd say a month or so now to get you on the pod. So very much happy to get you on, especially on a Friday, which is we feel very lucky. Christian, Ethan, so Job, how are you two this week? How's your week been?
Good
Well,
start,
if I want to
Joe.
go
Good
first,
start, Joe.
I thought you were leaving
We're
it open for us. I'll take it. I'll take it.
Hey, Christian, you can tell the boys are nervous. You know, we never can usually shut Joe up, and we can tell these two lads are nervous. It's all good on my side though. Nothing really new. Just looking forward to getting the podcast. I know this is something that Lewis has been dying to get Christian on for quite a while. Been a bit of a fangirl recently, getting him on. So it's good to have you on, Christian. I appreciate you putting us out my misery of hearing about getting you on the pod. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me. I'm in Denmark at the moment, so I'm in my hometown here in my summer house. So it's good setting for a podcast, I guess.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. So Christian, I think just to get things started, obviously our podcast, we talk about men's health, both physical and mental. I'd be keen to understand, what does men's health mean to you? When you hear that phrase and when you think about it, what does that mean to you?
Oh, there's something about sort of health in general. I mean, then you just put men's in front, then you immediately move into a territory where men are often not very open about sort of talking about health and not as active in taking care of themselves. So it's that sort of the territory you go into. But it sort of, obviously when I started, I sort of think about sort of all the things that sort of are important for your health. Is it? I mean, for me, to get your fitness routine, you get some exercise, to get the right food, to get your sleep, which is very important for me as well. That mental aspect, which I'm sure we can get into, but also, I mean, really that sort of territory about when there is something wrong, do you go to the doctor? Do you do something about it fast enough? Which I can say for myself, not always as quick as my wife, for instance. But I think we should be better at talking about it for sure.
Yeah, I think that's something we've really discovered since doing this podcast, where irrespective of people's backgrounds, irrespective of where people are in life, there seems to be a common theme within all of us men where we feel we're invincible, where, as you say, we don't go to the doctors or seek medical help if we're maybe if we're not feeling our best. We almost just crack on and feel like, it's fine. We don't have to maybe get the support and help that we need to feel our very best. And that's essentially what we're trying to do with this pod. Is we're a group of normal 30-ish blokes, all got our own sort of life experiences, all had probably situations in our lives where we have gone through some times of probably trouble or difficult moments, and we found as a group of friends, actually just speaking to each other, having this session sort of at least once a week to talk about how we feel and what's going on in our lives, has enabled us to maybe not have the stresses that we've previously had. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Getting that help is something that, and support in your life, is something that men definitely need to do more of.
I think it's that old men's mental, like kind of like, it's always been a thing that men are like afraid to talk because they don't want to come across as though they're, weak or come across as though they're not, how do you put it, like masculine in a way, And I think
Yeah.
that's something that we need to really seriously like try and get away from, because it can't be just coincidence that there's a correlation between like male suicide and female suicide being much higher in men than it is in
Mhm.
women. And I mean, we've had some great guests on in terms of people who know a lot about the subject, who've even said a lot of it is just that, men don't talk enough, or they don't show
Mhm.
emotion like women do. And it's something I think we could learn from the women, I think it's something
Yeah.
we do.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're right there. So Christian, that's a really interesting first sort of point for you around men's health and your perception of it. What I'd be really keen on is equally to sort of take it a step back and understand maybe you as a person more, and sort
Mm.
of the journey you've gone on through sort of your life and career. Um, I'd be really keen to understand. Obviously, you're in a really senior position now, but kind of what your life experiences have been
Mm.
through your career in terms of to get you to where you are today.
Yeah, thank you, Louis. I'm Danish, right? You know that. I grew up
Yeah.
in a relatively small town, sort of 50 kilometers outside Copenhagen, relatively small place. Have a brother. My mom and dad got divorced when I was about 10. Went to school in the same place, played football in that area. So I've all grew up there. And most of my friends still live in that area, and for some reason I had that hunger to go somewhere else and go international very, very early. I don't know where I got that from. I was the first in the family to get a sort of a long academic education, and studied business in Copenhagen Business School, and went into consulting early on, which is a great learning platform, and so you learn to sort of address a problem and solve it and present it, and increasingly get more and more responsibility. And more by coincidence than anything else, I got an opportunity to join Telenor. I had worked on 3 projects for them and got an opportunity to join and run their strategy team. Did that, and that was a big part of sort of that getting into telco. And I'm still in telco now. I've done
Yeah.
now 18 years later, still in telco and love it. Did some different types of roles, and got an opportunity to then actually at a point in time in my career where I felt that I needed to do something else, and actually went to my boss at the time and resigned, and got an opportunity to then say, well, he said, well, I'm going to Malaysia. Do you want to join? And I sort of called my wife, and we made a quick decision to say yes. I'm going to quit the other job and went to Malaysia, which was a massive learning journey for me. Relatively sort of early in career, go and be effective in another country. It's really a fantastic learning opportunity, because a lot of the things you take for granted when you are in the same country is everybody else have the same culture, a lot of the same culture and norms, and how you are effective in a work setting. All of these things are different when you are in a different country, and you need to you look at yourself from outside in a very different way. And did a lot of very sort of new things for me career-wise. I headed up regulatory. I did network sharing with a big competitor, things that I had not worked with before at all, which was a big part of my career development, I feel, and probably something that I think, sort of looking back, you think about how important it is that you have the bosses that have played a big role in your life and been part of developing you, and people who believed in you enough to give you that odd chance, that why would you give it to me type challenge.
Yeah.
That really sort of throws you into the next sort of curve of your career. Spent 6 years in Malaysia, spent 4 years in Sweden before I joined EE in the UK a bit more than 3 years ago.
Yeah. I think you've touched upon something there. Sorry, Christian. You touched
No, you go
something
ahead.
there around having mentors and leaders in your life. How important do you think it is for people to find mentors, and how would you suggest people best do that? Because I've had great mentors in my career to date, and I feel like I've always just found them by chance or by luck. Is there any way kind of how you've went about finding mentors, or has it just been a natural synergy by working with people who've naturally took akin to you?
No, I think it's. I mean, it's. I've had mentors that I got as part of the program, and they've been great, and it's a powerful learning. But I think the most influential mentors I've had have been people I've met, bosses or people around me that I've sort of come to work with or got to know, and I've leveraged over time. And I think that's often because mentorship is about also knowing the person. What is it that you need to develop as well? So it's often that relationship that people you stumble upon, or a boss or people you work with, and it's just that it's incredibly important as you develop your career that you find people around you who believe in you and who can develop you, and also honest enough with you to tell you where you need to develop if you need to develop, right? So it's that type of relationship which is very powerful.
Yeah.
Something I actually resonated with, Christian. I know you were saying about mentors and stuff like that, helping you develop mentally in terms of your career path. But something stuck out that you said to me was about sort of all your family and friends relatively still being in Denmark. How did you find the mental aspect of leaving close ones and going to such a big jump? I mean, Denmark to Malaysia, for me, that's a huge shock, change in culture, shock, change in people, diversity, like, you know what I mean? So how did that affect you mentally, and how did you learn to cope, or was there any?
Well, I mean, I left on a 2-year contract, not on a 13-year journey, which it has been so far, right? So you leave on a 2-year contract and think you're gonna go back after 2 years, and then you get a couple of extensions, and before you know it, you spend 6 years in Malaysia, and I have the luxury of having a couple of very good groups of friends that I stay very close to, and I still do now. I have the luxury of having one of them coming over tonight. I have a group of friends from my high school that I'm still seeing, a group of 7 that's I'm constantly meeting as much as possible and traveling back to see as well. So it's about sort of staying connected as well. Of course, when you go away for that way, you're not as close to your family and your friends in the same way, but that requires just that you need to invest a bit more to stay close. And then I brought my family, right? My wife is my best friend and my best coach and mentor as well. So she's been with me on the journey all along, and we've got 2 kids on the journey as well now. A daughter who's 15 and a son who's 12. So and as a family, you get a very tightly knit unit, because you're not going to that odd family birthday every weekend, right? You're together much more, I think, as a tight unit, right? So it's you go on a journey and you learn something else, you pick something else up. Very different, obviously, from my own upbringing, but a good one, I think.
Yeah, it sounds great. To be fair, it sounds like you've been on a hell of a journey. It's still not written yet. You know what I mean? You've got a long way to go by the sounds of it, Christian. I mean, Joby's just made a great point there about sort of leaving your family and things like that. But also, I just want to go back to, you mentioned, you know, football and potentially playing. I just want to know if you were involved in any sports growing up. Are you still involved in sports? You know, myself, Lewis, or footballers. You know, Joby's a UFC. He's into his UFC martial arts, and I say footballers in a broad term because they're laughing at me.
No, you mean a very...
Yeah, I have not played elite football, but I've always loved to play football. I mean, since I was a kid, I've been playing badminton. I mean, and I played squash. And I'm sort of always kept fit. I played sort of floorball as well, which is sort of an indoor type ice hockey thing. And and now it's more running, because it's the most flexible thing, right? It's just I mean that it's my go-to place as well. It's incredibly important for my mental health and for how effective I am, that I'm in a good place. It's the same when you're on an airplane. Make sure you get your oxygen yourself before you take care of others. For me, I need to get my exercise, and my run is where it's me time. It's for me to think. It's my zen now, and it's easy to do, because it's just put on your shoes and go for a run for 45-60 minutes, and you're good.
Yeah. Are you good at running? Would you say, like, are you? I know you'll probably know people in our wider team. So Alex Cornett, for example, he does lots of running, doesn't he? He's completed all of the marathons. But like, where would you put yourself on that sort of level of running?
I mean, Alex runs very fast.
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
done
he does.
a handful of marathons, a bit more, but I'm certainly not as fast as Alex.
Yeah.
So,
In terms of you, no, go on.
No, but I mean, I've done my marathons, and it's not for the run itself. It's just as much for something to look forward to with a couple of friends. We sign up a couple of friends, and you keep each other honest on your training towards it, and when you go, you're together, and it becomes an event, and you have fun with it, right? So it's just it becomes a social thing as well that I really enjoy.
Yeah, I think that's, for me, running is definitely the one thing that keeps me, as you say, that time for yourself, that time to. We're all busy in our daily life. Me and Christian, for example, so Joby, we have had a kid in the last, separately, not together, with our own partners.
Are you sure about
that? We've had a child each in the past year.
Yep, he's one tomorrow on Monday, actually.
Yours was one on Monday.
Yeah.
Mine was one last month, and it's been. I have to be honest. It's been a really thank you. It's been a really hard year balancing that idea of career, being a good partner, trying to be a friend, again, look after yourself with running and reading and learning and all the things that we need as a human to feel satisfied and happy in our own life, and then try and be a dad. So given, Christian, your workload is probably, well, it will be considerably more than mine, even though I feel like I'm really busy anyway. How do you balance that, your work life and then your personal life? How does that go?
Yeah, I mean, when I moved to Malaysia in the first place, my wife moved obviously with me, and she got pregnant relatively quickly, and then we had a son there. So the first couple of years, she was just staying home, and we had the luxury of having some help. When you're in Malaysia, it's easier to get help, so we had help in the house. So that sort of was a starting point, and since then it's turned out my son needs a bit of extra support. He's in a special needs school now, and does fantastic. He's a fantastic boy, but he needs a bit more help, and that means my wife has decided not to go back to work yet, and spends a bit more time in supporting him, and that gives me a bit of flexibility. And there's no doubt that situation for me in my home. I mean, that sort of balance that I have with a great marriage and two wonderful kids, it's a fantastic starting point. I mean, it's once you start having challenges or trouble at home, then you are not as effective, right? So it's again, you ladder up, and you eat well, you exercise, you're in a good place in your home, and you can be more effective. So it's those things that you sort of all add up.
Yeah. I think when I look at us, again, myself and Joby, Joby, for you for the last year, how's it been for you? Obviously, we're in very different roles. So, Christian, for context, Job's in our one of our contact center teams.
Currently, right this second.
Currently, literally right at this second. How have you found balancing sort of being a new dad and then sort of the work-life part?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult, isn't it? Especially in the circumstances that, like, the transition that we're going through at the moment and stuff like that. Especially my position within the business. Obviously, just so Christian can kind of get context, I work as an outbound sales advisor here in our call center in Gosforth and Newcastle, doing BT, primarily full fiber. But obviously we've just closed down and now moving towards inbound. So I will be starting to sort of take charge of selling EE products and EE mobile and all the rest of them that I've never had to do. So you've got the I don't want to call it stress, because actually I kind of find it quite refreshing, because I have been stuck in the same position for such a long time that, like anything, you kind of get used to something so much that you end up taking your foot off the gas a bit because it feels like you're too stagnant. So it's actually been quite a refreshing change from my perspective. But I think it is a lot harder than I thought in terms of the balance of trying to be the best dad ever in the entire world, but also trying to focus on bettering your career and pushing your career further. And I feel like I'm still trying to work out that balance. I'm trying to get as much support from people who've done it before. So anyone who I know who's kind of progressed and had kids and stuff like that, I'm trying to sort of pick their brains to say, like, look, how do you find that perfect balance between sort of being there and spending time with your family, as well as also giving, because you can't give 100% of both. Like, how do you do it? Do you know what I mean? I mean, Christian probably has a way better idea than both of us, going through it himself, especially progressing and having them, like you said. And I don't want to assume, Christian, but it sounds like a lot of that has to do with how fantastic your partner's been in terms of supporting you, you know?
Well, I think in many ways, I think having kids makes you, I think, a better person, a better leader, because it forces you to put things in perspective, right? I mean, it makes things sort of come together, and sort of you come out of a position where you think that working 2 hours or 5 hours more is the thing that takes you to the next level, which it rarely is. It's more about looking at yourself and looking to others for feedback and figuring out what are the things you need to develop to go to the next level. And again, it's rarely just working 5 hours more. It's often other things. I mean, I have my own little model that I sort of think about when I think about potential and things I want to develop. And it's sort of, I look at 5 things, and that's sort of what I can manage on a hand, right? It's people's problem solving skills, analytical skills. Are you good at problem solving? I always say to people who are very good at problem solving that they overestimate the importance of problem solving, because there are 4 other factors to it, right? It's not enough to know what is right or wrong, and there's more to it. The other thing I look at is, are you ambitious? Is it important for you to win? And not all roles is equally important to do that. But if you're in sales, or if you're in my role in delivering in P&L and these things, it is important to be ambitious and to want to win. And if you're good at problem solving and you're ambitious, you're sort of in a good place. But there's still 3 more to go, right? There's something around communicating with impact, which for me is number 3, because a lot of people know what's right or wrong, but they are not able to effectively communicate it in a way that sort of people understand and engage with. So that's my number 3. Number 4 is about, for me, stakeholder and widely sort of empathy and how you work with other people. Do they want to work with you? Can you get people on your team? Can you there's no way I could be effective in a setup like the role I have now if I was unable to work with Nick in customer service, or Bridget in commercial, or Kevin in digital, or Stephen in finance. I mean, so you need to work with people, and you need to work with get people on your team. And then for me, the 5th is about curiosity and being brave, because things are developing so fast, and new things are coming in, and certainly if you want to progress your career, that willingness to learn more and not being afraid of jumping into something, those are things I look at when I look at sort of people's potential and my own development over time, and just realizing on your journey that there's no one is perfect at everything. Right? So we have our combination of things, but we also have things we need to develop. I mean, we're not. I quite quickly figured out that sort of when it comes to communicating with impact, I've had bosses who are almost natural entertainers and great on stage. I quite quickly figured out that that's not my style. I'm not a natural entertainer. I'm something else. But I can see that I can be effective in communication with a more authentic, more visionary style, talking about where we want to go, why do we want to go there, and be authentic and use different sort of mechanics in how you present, and that's been my way to it. But one of the things I've worked with, so it's I think it's just important to look at all these things and and sort of figure out what is your formula and what are the things you need to work with in order to be effective.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be using them definitely, because actually the last one you said is kind of what I feel has actually been my biggest barrier, is just not wanting, because I've been so comfortable, not wanting to take that risk in case it didn't work out. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I'd say that's been one thing I'm probably going to listen back to this and write them down at some point, because it's something I do find that I struggle with. And the second thing you were saying about, having the kids makes you become a better person. I feel like I do have more of a drive now that Alfie's here to
Mm-hmm.
strive to be something better for him. And I'm assuming that's the same for yourself as well, Lewis.
Yeah, I think for me, since Oliver came, it has been the biggest change in my life. I was probably really guilty and so of doing what Christian said around just thinking if I work more, I did 5 more hours, 10 more hours. So Christian, for context, I started at the same day as Chris in our business. I came in as an advisor and worked my
Mm-hmm.
way through, and I very much got out of the situation probably by putting in the more hours and more hours. But where I now sit in marketing, that isn't the way for me to be better at my job. It's not. I actually have to probably look within myself more of my strengths and weaknesses and work out, okay, if I'm not as good at something, we'll use an example, a business plan for argument's sake. Okay, I need to get really good at some of the commercial aspects versus actually if I just put more hours in, because actually it's more about working smarter than necessarily just working harder. And I've tried over this last year to put a lot more of that work in of, okay, work on my weaknesses and become more rounded versus, but equally not forgetting if I'm good at something to double down on that. And that's a balance within itself, actually. Something that you did say, Christian, though, has really stuck with me around where you said you didn't feel that you were maybe naturally an entertainer within your sort of communication style, and it's something you've had to work on. How have you done that? So if you have identified a weakness, how have you then found a way to sort of make that a strength and a skill that you can then rely on?
No, but I mean, there's a couple of things that have been powerful for me sort of during. I think I use some of my strength, which is my analytical skills, my structuring skills. So try to make sure that you think through, work through, prepare a proper story. What is the story you're going to tell, and work that in. And then I had a very powerful experience with a guy called David Phillips, who is sort of training people in communication skills, and incredibly powerful. And he talks about this as a skill. I mean, it's not something you're born with. The communication is a skill, and it's something you can learn. And it gives you a whole lot of tools to work with, and I found them very powerful. And it's sort of leaning in and looking at storytelling and communication with impact. And there's tons of material. He's done a bunch of TED Talks that I've looked at a couple of times, and I find them very powerful. And he's interesting because you can see he's not a natural entertainer himself. You can see that it's a skill he's learned, and he's very, very powerful. So that's a good example, and it's almost more authentic in that way, right? But it's really few people. I mean, it's really back to this sort of. And I always say that when you build your development plan and when you look at your career, be honest with yourself. Try not to shy away from these things. And I think another example for that was, I mean, for me, I'm very sort of focused on solving problems and strategy and vision and the company and all these things that I tend to underestimate sometimes. Being personal, showing the personal side of me, and I often get that feedback. And I had an example where when I joined my role in Sweden, and my wife gave me some advice before going in. I mean, instead of talking about all the things you've done, talk about your family, give them a feel for who you are. And it's quite, I sort of underestimated how powerful it was. I had a person who, when I left, he had in between the 4 years I spent in Sweden, left Sweden and left the company and come back. And he said that day was the most powerful presentation he's ever seen. That person who comes in, joins a company, and don't start talking about all the things he's done, talks about who he is instead.
Yeah.
Went back and told my wife, but it's quite powerful. Sometimes you underestimate those things, right?
Yeah, no, one, I can say you've definitely stuck to that as well, because when we had our marketing event, where we had it was outdoors, and we obviously had some speakers in, and you gave a talk, and you actually spoke about your personal background and stuff, didn't you? And I agree. I found that really powerful, hearing about who you are, because we have loads of updates where we know about business performance, and it's our job to know about all those sorts of things. And the fact that you approached it in a human way meant that everyone else, probably throughout the rest of the day, felt, okay, we now need to get on a human level with everyone and build better relationships, because that's what the event really was for. So I think you used that as a great opportunity to sort of set the tone, which was really good. What that makes me think of, you're very welcome. Thank you for sharing. With regards to what you're saying there around maybe not leading with a business sort of talk when you're introducing yourself in certain environments, it kind of makes me think around the book that Simon Sinek wrote, with Start With Why. And if we lead with the why, so your why for coming to work, or your why of who you are as a person, people are going to be naturally way more engaged in terms of who you are, versus if you say what I am Christian, I'm an MD of marketing for EE. Whilst that's really interesting, you'll always struggle to get on a real human level with people, and probably build those relationships which enable you to be even better at being Christian, the marketing MD at EE Consumer. Like, I feel we almost need to reverse engine, start with who we are as a person. And my advice to anyone who's looking to progress their career would be, when you're building relationships and you're trying to progress your career, focus on the relationships you have with people, versus just thinking, I need to just work, because the relationships you have with people will be the thing that actually helps you progress your career, because people then will feel invested to support you on that journey. That's something that I've really experienced over the past few years, as I've sort of made a few moves within our business.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. But it's obviously, as you progress your career, incredibly important that you are seen as a person who gets things done. Right?
Yeah.
It's that combination about sort of creating a relationship around sort of getting things done, and being a person people want to work with. It's that combination. I think that's very powerful.
Yeah.
I think it's taking that into life as well. So obviously, I've listened to you guys there. I don't have children, and you have all made sort of powerful statements to who you are and where you've come from, and the journey is all at different stages as parents. But I think having the relationship and the conversations, obviously, Christian, like, I wasn't present at the event, but the way Lewis has described it is very much how, when you were at the Gospel Centre, I was lucky enough to be in the meeting where you addressed everyone and you're really personable, and you spoke about yourself in that instance, and that stuck with me. I mean, it's been quite a while now, and that's still stuck with me. And I think that's something. I think if you want to not just be successful at work, but be successful at life, you need to be able to do in day to day. And I think that's some of the barriers that we're breaking down. And we're learning different angles from our friendships. Like, I'm learning more about Joby. I've knew Lewis for nigh on 12 years, and I'm learning stuff through this podcast and through just having conversations like you're saying, just more personal conversations rather than a, how you doing? Yeah, I'm all right. You okay? Yeah, I'm good. So I think it's those barriers that you need to break down, not just in the work, but definitely in a personal life as well. And I think people will benefit from it. And anyone listening, all it starts with a general conversation. Put yourself out there as well. Like, obviously, Christian, you're putting yourself out there, and you're almost in a way making yourself vulnerable by telling people about yourself and who you are as a person. And not many people would do that. And I think you reap all the rewards, because then obviously people are willing to do that, and it's a give and take relationship for sure. It's quite refreshing as well, given the level that you work within EE.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for saying that.
So within that, I think what would be interesting, again, where we are, we're starting to touch upon how people can sort of best progress their career, and you've mentioned sort of the 5 steps and things. What have been the big moments of change in your career, Christian, where potentially you've had moments where almost the penny's dropped, or something's happened in your career where you've gone, okay, I'm now taking this serious? Has there been any moments like that in your life?
Yeah, I can think of a number of them. I think the first one was maybe actually related to health a little bit when I moved from consulting into Telenor at the time. The first time was a point in time where I worked too much and slept too little, and it's the reason that I still today, where I didn't do that at the time, obviously, because it didn't exist, wear an Oura ring that sort of tracks your sleep, and not because I believe it makes my sleep better, but it keeps me honest to myself when I don't. So it's just realizing how important sleep is, and that was a bit of an eye opener for me at the time. So getting out of consulting, working that much, traveling a bit too much as well, into a sort of a corporate role was a big step for me. Also a step where you realize that you can't do everything yourself in a consulting world where you lead a consulting team and you present to a client. You often can. I mean, I could do the PowerPoint the evening before and do a great presentation in front of the client, and most things would be all fine. Whereas when you start managing a team of 25, you can't. You need to work with other people, and you realize that you now need to not just do it yourself, but be effective. And that's a bit of a learning curve you go through when you sort of work with people. That's sort of one moment that sort of stuck with me. I had another moment which was a bit earlier, actually. I had a part-time job in the Ministry of Business and Industry in Denmark, and there was a visit with some very senior people from OPEC coming in from the Middle East and meeting a couple of ministers in Denmark. And for some reason, my boss was the head of department, asked whether I could take that on, because he couldn't do it, and nobody else from the team could. So I took that on. I was obviously not saying a whole lot. I was just there, but watching our ministers and watching some of the senior people in the room, I realized quite quickly that there was nothing here that was magic. There's nothing I couldn't do. And that was a bit of a wake-up call, because I'm sort of moving out of a small town into Copenhagen, being 3 years into my studies, sitting all of a sudden with leaders of OPEC and a couple of our ministers, feeling that, okay, I can follow this. I could obviously I couldn't do that at the time, but still got that feeling that this is possible. And that was a bit of an eye opener for me. And then I would think that the third thing that I think about was that role. I was been in Malaysia for 2 weeks, and I got the opportunity to negotiate a network sharing deal. I'd never worked with networks before. And I remember my boss told me, Christian, I know you, and you don't know why it won't happen, why it can't happen, so you'll make it happen. If I ask our technical team to do it, they'll tell me 10 reasons it can't. And so I ended up actually getting that deal done. And I think it's one of the biggest and most difficult achievements I've done. And those are things where you just throw yourself into entirely new territory, and somehow ends up getting it all to show. I mean, those are 3 moments. I mean, there are many other moments I could think about, but those are 3 big moments that have been part of shaping me and forming how I think and the belief I have.
Yeah, they all seem like very defining moments. I think the one in Malaysia seems to be the one, because you've referenced it a couple of times. And was that the moment you went from being probably good at your job to then thinking, actually, I can be a game changer in a potential industry here because I'm doing something that maybe other people haven't done?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it was the first time I was part of a top management team, right? So it was 2 weeks into my first role as part of a top management team, which was one thing. So there's an element of proving yourself as part of a person reporting to a CEO, and at the same time just sitting around a table where you had people from group, both Axiata Group and Telenor Group, senior people in senior positions, and realized that I was driving it, right? And running it from our side, and sort of creating that puzzle, a stakeholder management puzzle, who to influence, how, and how to make it happen. That was a defining moment for me in many ways. it definitely was, and for the company I was part of at the time, it was definitely a game changer in terms of our cost structure. So yes, I would say so.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it. So we have a section as we come to the end of the podcast, because we've got sort of 10 minutes or so until we're going to be wrapping up. Ethan does a session with all of our guests where we ask for some levels of inspiration that you've had in your life. Ethan, do you want to ask the question? I will not steal your thunder.
Well, Christian, Lewis seems to have stole me thunder because you are his guest, so he wants to. You may as well finish it off, Lewis, and ask Christian.
Okay, if that's how you want to go with it. So, Christian, what we tend to do, we ask guests throughout your life, has there been either a book? Has there been, you've referenced TED Talks, some guests have even referenced the film that has, and potentially still is today, something that you have used as inspiration or has changed your way of thinking that would be helpful for our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, for me, he would probably love me saying, but I mean, those sessions. I mean, I also had the luxury of following up with David Phillips, so I had both watched his TED Talks and done it several times, and I've had the opportunity to work with him on a one-to-one level as well. And I think they have been great, because he takes a perspective to presentation technique, which is about the hormones you sort of activate with people with different types of stories, and he does that very, very effectively live, and he does that very effectively in his TED Talks, and I think that's very powerful. I think that's been a toolbox that I've been coming back to throughout. There's no one film or sort of book that I think has made the same impact.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. I'm definitely going to go and look at his YouTube, because I actually haven't come across him before.
I've never heard.
I've never heard of him.
He's Swedish, so it's not. I mean, he's not sort of internationally and sort of known in that. But now he's built a bit of a business, and he's started storytelling.com. So yeah, it's definitely growing.
Storytelling.com.
Maybe he's a future guest. I will reach out, and I'm sure I can probably get him on. Yeah,
I heard the podcast was finished once Christian had been on. I think that's you said the podcast to me. I think this is the only reason the podcast got started, was to have Christian on. I think that's it, really. Christian, just you on the back of that. I appreciate we're pushing the time here, but obviously people are within the industry, a similar industry as yourself, obviously different career paths. I take my hat off to Job and to Lewis. They've both worked really hard, and they're in their own avenues, and they're going their own journeys. I've known Lewis for, like I've mentioned, too many years.
Plymouth Argyle years.
Since when he played for Plymouth Argyle back in the day. But the thing for me is, it's been an absolute credit to watch these boys grow. And Lewis, it's well documented that Lewis has rose from the ashes, and he's become an absolute sort of gem in the industry he works in, and he's very career driven, often sacrifices family time for that career. But if we had this opportunity to have this chat with you 7 years ago for me, when I first came into BT, and I know it's obviously EE, what advice would you give someone who's starting their journey and maybe at the start of their road, and what advice would you give them?
No, I think I would go back to some of the things we talked about earlier, and I think it starts with looking yourself in the mirror and figuring out what are the things you need to develop to go where you want to go, and why do you want to go there? What makes you happy? Where do you get your energy from? And what's your formula? Because it's again, I talked about before sort of how I thought effective communication was earlier in my career, and just realizing that there are different ways of being effective in communication, and you need to figure out what is your way. I think that's an important part. And then I think it's when you think about progression in your career, and depending on sort of where you are, I think I often say to people who are sort of in my teams or 2 level down, and that it's about the higher you get in an organization, the more aspects you need to include. That's why it's important to move sideways, right? I mean, if I look at my own progression, I've done network sharing, I've done big IT projects, I've done regulatory, I've done corporate communications, I've done pricing, I've done channel management, I've done analytics, I've done many of the aspects around running a telco, and that makes me, I think, a more effective marketer as well, because I know the different aspects of the business, and it's been part of sort of rounding me off and realizing, because it's like the higher you get, the more things you need to include in your decision making, whether it's change management,
Yeah.
to
I
financial
think
aspects, or regulatory aspects, or legal aspects, or there's so many aspects you need to include, right? And not being afraid of taking a sideways move to build your profile and your sort of own experience, I think is an important one.
I think it's actually quite cool that you said that, because obviously from my perspective here on the sales floor, I've moved quite a lot of times between different aspects of the business, between loyalty, value, retain and gain, outbound, inbound, etc. And my dream and passion has always been sort of graphic design, sort of that marketing side of things as well. And it kind of does put in perspective what you were saying about being more all rounded. There's a lot of things I look at now within EE that I think, actually, you know what, if I did ever progress towards sort of graphic design within EE, having that direct contact with customers and seeing it from the frontline perspective, I feel like I could get a lot from that in graphic design, which you wouldn't usually put the two together directly from an outside perspective, but from an internal perspective, I feel like, especially speaking to some of the lads Lewis has put us in touch with, etc., it's probably great experience to have that frontline experience to be able to further. So I think it is something that a lot of people sort of take for granted, is like you said, taking side steps or being more fully rounded in that sense of things as well.
Yeah, but there's no doubt. There's no doubt.
Yeah, I think as long as you look at every experience as an opportunity to learn and grow, it might not be the right experience for you, and it means you move faster than you might have originally planned. So if you get there and you go, actually, this just isn't for me. Okay, well, then you've learned that isn't for you, and it's all about finding the things that we're passionate about, finding the things that we enjoy, push you, stretch you, allow you to be in an environment where you feel challenged, all those sorts of things. So my advice, as it always is to you, Joby, is just keep pushing and learning, but you have to be bolder. That's the biggest thing, and not bold because if you took your cap off, you're the same as me, but bolder
I
in the
thought
sense.
I thought you said it first. Actually, I thought you
Yeah,
said you have to be bold. I was like, oh, well, I've already
yeah,
ticked that box.
yeah.
It's number 5,
More
isn't
bold.
it? It's
Yeah.
number 5 that Christian was saying. I think that's if I was analysing myself from the back of this podcast, I'd say for me personally, I've learned a lot from you, Christian. So I really appreciate the time you've given us today, because it has put in perspective that I do have that weakness, and that probably is holding us back. And now that I do have that drive with having my son, I think it's something that I do want to sort of personally develop on. So I really appreciate you giving us that time, because I've learned a lot from that.
Well, you're welcome.
Yeah, me too, Christian. I just want to thank you. You know, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, and getting to chat with you. And I was just going to ask you, before Lewis sort of has another chat with you, if we do a part 2, can we come do it in the summer house?
You're more than welcome.
Go do face to face. Cheers, mate. Thank you.
We could probably sort of part 2 in London one day or whatever. Stuff like that. Yeah,
I want to go to Denmark.
I would love to go to Denmark. I had a My Heritage like a DNA test, and all of my ancestry is from like Denmark, Sweden, Norway area, Scandinavian. So I would love to go. I've never been before. Actually.
Can we just clarify that just because that is the case doesn't mean you get to go to Denmark?
It's a free pass, yeah. No, it's a free pass. It's in the blood.
Yeah, it doesn't quite work like that. But yeah, Christian, again, I will echo what the boys said. Thank you so much for giving up your time, and it's super inspirational to have someone like you, again, spreading the word that men need to look after their health, and sharing some of your experiences and thoughts as being one that I've learned a lot from, and yeah, extremely grateful. Thank you.
No, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Really appreciate it.
Look forward till next time.
See you in Denmark.
Thank you, guys.
Let's go. Time to grind, get inside your mind. Yeah, we working overtime. That's the only way to climb. We gon' make it in our prime. Signing on the dotted line, cashing checks left and right. That's the way I'm living life.